So once, if education is simply about, transferring data, right, or knowledge even, which is slightly deeper, knowledge to people so they can be prepared to be a good citizen, or prepared for society, or prepared to work and be productive, or prepared, that kind of thing. If we're just educating so that they know more things, so they can be more effective, then that's fine. But I don't think that's not an educational philosophy.
Yeah,
it's an approach for I don't know, what would you call that? Training, I guess, but not really education.
Yeah, that's sort of what and this, I guess we can kind of keep this in, and I'll edit in, because I feel like this is gonna.
It's fine. Go ahead.
But yeah, I don't know. That's sort of an issue I've had with education. I don't know. Me personally, I just feel like modern education, it does a bad job at getting people to really, like, just simply put, think. It's regurgitation a lot, in my opinion at least.
Sure, no, it's fair to say that. I think the challenge is that the response to that is sometimes incomplete. Like, in other words, if you say, well, we teach critical thinking. All right, sure. What does that mean? Right. So if that means that we're going to teach, logic and symbolic logic and argumentation and debate and critical reasoning skills and the history of, then sure, that those things are really good. I think what sometimes happens is that we talk about critical thinking, and we throw things at kids that are critical thinking type things, in almost the same way that we throw the other things at them, right? So you need to learn this, you need to memorize these critical thinking things, right?
Yeah.
These rules of whatever, and regurgitate it on the test so you can, right? That's not, okay, that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's good for kids to learn those things, but the idea is not to teach kids to learn the functions of critical thinking, although you do want to do that. The idea is to teach kids
The how.
critically. In other words, so instead of teaching kids the philosophy, you teach kids philosophically, right? And so what we do at IndED is we spend a lot of time teaching through conversation, right? Great conversations is what it is, because it's an allusion to the history of Western civilization, which one could call a great conversation, the great conversation. Also, though, the best way to teach is through conversation, because it forces the learner to participate.
Yes, yeah.
So if you're not asking questions or answering questions or participating, then you're not learning as effectively as you could otherwise. And so teaching philosophically versus teaching philosophy, I think and plus I think, like we mentioned earlier, the best teaching philosophy is philosophy, right? Is to teach not just how to think, but teach, give kids and adults skills and practice and exercise in reasoning through things. I think that's part of it.
Yes, yeah, I agree. That's kind of that's always where I kind of see the education system lack. I think the way I sort of see it is, I do agree that they try to teach critical thinking.
Sure.
But it feels almost like, what's a good example? I don't know, sometimes like in math, you'll teach, it'd be similar to saying 2 + 2 = 4, and sort of memorizing a multiplication chart, instead of understanding, well, why, if you do 2 × 4, why is it 8?
Well, I think it's possibly, and gets a little too in the weeds, but with math education, I think it's even worse than that. I think if you go to National Academies of Science, there's a really good foray into into math education, and it talks about like the 5 different steps of teaching mathematics, like a certain mathematical process or skill or idea. And so there's like 5 different steps. The first one is conceptual. Like if you take, 2 widgets, or 2 cheese balls, whatever, and you put them aside, and you put 2 more, and you say, 2, this is 2 sets of 2, so 2 times 2 is 4, right? And you can show that, and the kid can say, oh, that's what times means, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's great. So, so we know what times mean. At that point, once you've done that enough and you do it at scale, well, here's 15 of them, and here's 15 more. That's 2 sets of 15. What's, if you add 15 plus 15, well, here's 3 sets of 15. And you kind of get more and more complex until you know that they understand what that time symbol means. It means 2 sets of this. So, or 4 sets of this, or whatever. So that's the conceptual part, right? At the very end, like the step 5 is strategic part, right? And so that's when you know something deeply enough where you can use well, you know when to use it. You know when it's appropriate to use it and how best to use it in certain circumstances. Okay.
It's more of the application.
Right. It's kind of an application the strategic way. And so I never can remember 2 and 4, but I remember 3. And 3 is procedural. Procedural is if you've got 15 times 15, there's an algorithm for doing that without taking out 15 groups of 15, right? So what happens is in modern math, I think a lot of times they want to do is they want to go from the conceptual and then stay on the idea side of it, which sounds noble, but then they just kind of skip to the strategic. Now that we understand how conceivably works, now we're going to give you ways to apply it and in the real world. They're obsessed with the real world, right? So, and they skip the one in the middle. It's one of the reasons I use Khan Academy a lot, because Khan Academy is focused like a laser on that step 3, which is procedural. There's all these algorithms, long division. If you teach kids, elementary school kids, mathematics, if you can teach them the algorithm for long division and they can do it consistently, they can do most elementary mathematics. But these days they're avoiding those kinds of things. They're staying with the conceptual. Like they're doing long multiplication, they'll have the tens and the ones, the tens and the hundreds, and they'll do a column with ones and tens and hundreds, and you multiply the groups together, and then you add them together in the end, and you double check. That's insane, right? I mean, what's better is to use the algorithm that we all learned, right? And so teaching kids algorithms and teaching kids procedures of how to solve more complex. Once they understand the concept, all we're doing is we're talking about bigger, more complex numbers, but the concept's the same. They know the concept. Now we just want to get the answer in the most efficient possible way so that we can do the math. And a lot of times when kids get frustrated, it's because it takes too long to do things. And if they make a mistake, they don't know where they made the mistake, et cetera, et cetera. So if you have the algorithms that always work and you can do them repeat, that's a lot of repetition. And that's the part that I think they're missing. And it's the way that we were taught math. I say we, I'm a little older than you, but we were taught math in a procedural way. There's an algorithm and we use it and it always works. And if you make a mistake, you can go back and see where you made a mistake.
Why do you think, just out of curiosity, why do you think we kind of, I'll say, cling to that older method? Just because
it works, right? I mean, I'm a traditionalist, at heart, right? So things that work should only be ditched if there's a reason to ditch them. And as of now, I haven't seen a reason to ditch them, right? You see what I mean? I don't see the reason to ditch the algorithms that have worked. There are other ways to do it, and that's fine. But the challenge is that if you want families to be involved in education, which I think we do, I think we want parents to be involved, there's no real compelling reason to use a different algorithm that the parents aren't familiar with just for the sake of using a different algorithm. If that makes any sense.
That does,
I think parents sometimes, when I was I was younger, I wasn't a kid, but the new math was all the rage, like in the 90s, they kept talking about the new math. And, they were trying to do it differently then. And then with Common Core, they've tried to change it again. Parents feel left out of math education for that reason.
What was the new math back then?
Oh,
I guess.
I don't know what the difference was. I just know that people were obsessed with the changes that had happened. I mean, I had math education all the way through college, and through B school, at least to a degree. So it's hard for me to go back and kind of compare. But how to do long division and how to do long form multiplication, I see no reason to change that, right? And they did change that. And parents are like, that's not the way I did it. And the kids are like, well, teacher wants me to do it this way. And it's this thing, why, right? I mean, it never has made any sense to me.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I mean when I say, I guess, what's another way to put it? There's sort of I think sometimes with modern education, they kind of deviate from what works, kind of like the math example you're mentioning.
It's a good example because it's concrete. You can see the difference, right?
Yeah, because I've seen some, and I don't know if this is exactly what you're referring to, but I've seen some of the new math sort of on like social media, and there's a kid who's trying to do it, and then the parents like, I don't even understand how. I've seen weird things where they take like a number and there's lines everywhere. Even as I'm looking at it, I'm just like, I don't know how they're getting this answer.
No, there's nothing to be gained from it. To be honest, there's nothing to be gained from it. If they understand, especially when we're talking about lower level math, we're talking about arithmetic. We're talking about arithmetic. We're not talking about calculus. We're not talking about, complex, linear algebra or differential equations or anything. We're talking about arithmetic. And there's a finite number of things you need to know to get all of arithmetic. It's not a small number. It's probably a couple thousand skills or whatever. I mean, maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe not be that many, but there's a finite number of skills, and all you really need to do is know how to do those things. And there's no reason to throw in, let's let the the right brain kids look at it a different way or whatever. I mean, that's okay, but in the end, they're gonna have to solve a problem. And if you make it more complex and more, how should I say, ephemeral, for them to sort of solve the problem, and the parents can't help because they're like, this isn't math, this is art or something.
This is art, yeah.
Right? And then if that's the case, then nobody benefits. And I think it's because people want to sell curriculums. I think people want to do something new and innovative and sell another book, and it's not necessary. We know how to do math. It's not, math is not. It's not an unknown. So it's easy to pick on math because it's one of those things that's easy to see that there's no real reason to overcomplicate it.
I agree.
Again, long division. If you got a kid between 3rd and 8th grade, start with long division. Fractions, decimals, it's all there.
Yeah.
Right? And it's an algorithm that all parents learned when they were 3rd grade, 4th grade, whatever. So, it's something easy. And if that's how you do fractions and decimals, you can't ever go wrong. So, and then you get to exponents, et cetera. But it's all sort of the same set of algorithms, and it's just, it's repetition, and it's hard, it takes time. If you're not putting an hour or so a day into math, you're not putting enough time into math, unless you're just a genius, right? Which, and if you're that much of a genius, you should put an hour into math every day and get that far ahead.
Yeah.
Right. So
I want to, I do in a minute want to kind of get into, I guess, how you got into the education
world,
how you started. I've heard you, I've seen different videos and I've seen your website. I'm going to mispronounce it even though it's 5 letters.
IndED.
IndED. It's just IndED. Okay.
It's in, baby in a box, dead, like as in dead, no longer living, right?
Okay.
A lot of folks say in debt. That's not quite accurate, although it's not inaccurate. Or end, like your end or an ed education. Independent education is what it stands for. Right?
Okay.
So IndED. I started when my son was, the idea started when my son was in the 1st grade.
Okay.
And he's in the 9th grade now. And so we felt like he was in a public school for 1 year. He was in Montessori through kindergarten, and he was in public school for 1 year. And I just saw like the light of learning like drain, from his eyes. Like he just didn't care anymore. Basically, they told him to sit down and shut up enough times, and eventually, kids react one of 2 ways, especially boys, young boys. There's one of 2 ways to react to that when you're told to sit down and shut up enough. Either you eventually just sit down and shut up,
Yeah.
and you do as little as you need to do to get by, or you do the other.
Yeah.
Right? And my son was the former. He was a very calm, cool, collected kid. So eventually he plays to get along, and he got along. But I just didn't care anymore. It just didn't seem like, because Montessori is very, the kids find inspiration and they're allowed to kind of explore it and all that. So we put him in a Montessori for a while, but while he was in between second and I guess second, third, and maybe even fourth grade, he was in a Montessori, and a private Catholic Montessori, and it was good, but at some point that wasn't enough either. And so, but along between the time he was in the second grade and when he was in the fourth grade, I started developing an idea, and the idea was that kids should not have to choose between homeschooling and private school, right? And so obviously they have to choose, but there is a middle way. The idea that the only path for families that don't want to put their kids in an institution for 35 hours a week, locked down with security or whatever, is that they have to do all the education on their own, is a false choice, right? So our idea was that if you want to, you have to be a homeschooler, so you're the one that's eventually, in charge. But you can have help, you can have support. So we created a program called a micro school, where kids could get together for 12 hours a week. And it took a couple of years to get the model down, but we had it pretty much down in the 2019-2020 school year. It was 12 hours a week, 4 hours a day on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And we did a writing language arts class with one of my mentors, Helena. It was really, really good. She's been teaching, young kids writing language arts for a long time. And then she also did our science class, which was, she taught middle school science for years as well. So those are the two, and then I did the what we call civics and community. So we teach kids, about the Constitution. We can teach them about local politics and community. We'd have visitors come in who were leaders in the community. We would have field trips to historical sites and local community things. Depending on what the kids were interested in or where it was going, we would choose different topics for 11-week seasons. And we did war for a whole 11 weeks, which was really fun. We did world religions for a whole 11 weeks. So civics and community was this big bucket of humanities that I could pretty much throw anything in. We really enjoyed that. Okay. And then so civics and community, writing, language arts, and science was kind of the core. Like, this is what we do together. These are things that are just better done together, right? They're better done, not by yourself. Who wants to dissect a frog in their kid's pencil or whatever? So we do things like that. And then, so we were kind of on a path of maybe even creating a second one, and then COVID hit, and it sort of, threw everything kilter. But that's our model. Our model is for the micro school was 12 hours a week in person. And then the kids would get a personalized, what we call a living learning plan, for them and their family to, so they would know kind of what their goals were above and beyond the classes we would do. We would add in on site things like art or PE, chess club sometimes. We do, we had music, we had coding, a lot of local businesses got involved, and we did numerous things that we would add on as enrichment to the core classes in that 12 hours. But then above and beyond that, they have to learn some math, they have to do some writing and some reading, and so they have separate assignments that were more targeted towards their level. It's multi-age, and so kids are at different reading levels and have different interests, and so we would find ways to sort of tailor make an education for each kid. It was a lot of fun.
Okay. And when you say 12 hours, this is in addition to, I guess, their standard school?
Standard. No, they were homeschooled.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Okay.
These kids that participated in our micro school, it was during the day. It was 11:30 to 3, 11 to 3, basically. 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. And so, they were with us for 4 hours a day during the school day. So they were homeschooled. So Mondays, they'd put in a couple hours of work, maybe 3, depending on how many projects they had going on. before they came in to see us on Tuesdays and Thursdays, they put an hour in doing math and writing and reading, maybe. And then Fridays, they, do anything but school if we could avoid it, right? So if you do the math on that, it comes out to, they still have daily activities on Fridays, maybe, depending on the kid. So maybe an hour. So if you do the math, you're looking at like 15 to 18 hours a week during school, doing homeschooling, basically. And some of it with us, more than half of it with us, and the other part was on their own, with mom or dad or whatever.
Have you found that the results are better? This is kind of a weird question.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, have you found that the results are better homeschool versus in school? Just because, I just asked because me personally, my plan for my children, whenever that happens down the line, I'm leaning more towards homeschooling.
Are you engaged or married yet?
No, that's
usually the order of things, although it is 2020. Whatever. So you plan on homeschooling in other words?
I've been thinking about homeschooling, just because, kind of as I mentioned earlier, some of the ways I think some schools teach now, it lacks efficiency, and I personally feel like my kids' time is better used outside of the school. I know that probably sounds controversial to some people.
No, it's not controversial. It's look, luckily we have an experiment going this year, right?
Yeah.
I mean, COVID has, in Loudoun County, everything is remote. Even if you're going to a private school that allows you to come in person, a lot of it is so, sanitized and distanced and masked and face plated and plexiglass or whatever. You might as well just stay home and go remote because you can't, So, but the issue is that, kids are home with their parents now, and they've been that way for several months. So, I don't know. The challenge is that a lot of them are stuck on the computer for 7 hours a day. So it doesn't really accomplish what we'd like to accomplish, but they're still there, right? And they're still, you can pull them away from the computer if you have to. And my son, is in 9th grade, and he's on Zoom school for 7 hours a day and 4 days a week, and Mondays are asynchronous, so he's online, but he's not necessarily in a class. He's supposedly doing his schoolwork. He's playing Minecraft. So the issue is that we're finding out what it means for parents to be stuck at home with their kids. And a lot of parents over the last few months, and I'm getting inquiries too, of course, not as many, a lot more than I was getting in the beginning, because they're realizing how much of their kids' lives was actually busy work and how much of it is actually education. I think once they decided on the Zoom call, they're not Zoom, they use Google Meet or whatever, but once they decided on the video conferencing classes that the kids didn't have to show their face, that's what happened in Loudoun County, that was the end. To me, that was the end, because what that means is the last vestige of an actual participatory conversation between student and teacher was killed, and now it's just lecture and begging someone to respond when you ask a question, which is even worse than when you have to do that in class when you're just spouting a lecture and they're supposed to be paying attention and they respond. We don't do classes online because it's extremely hard. Not those kinds of classes anyway. It's extremely hard. We did some in this last spring for our kids who were already with us. We did some online classes, and they were moderately productive, but it was kind of a carryover, from before. The style was just kind of duplicated on online calls. But I don't know. I think a lot of teachers, on the teacher side, I think a lot of them just weren't prepared for distance learning, and it's no slight on them. I don't think it's a very fun way to learn, frankly, as a kid, or as a teacher. So it was, especially if you can't see their faces. Teachers thrive upon feedback. Right? They're human beings. The last time I checked, right? So I know I do. If I'm teaching a room full of kids and I can't see them even listening or paying attention, screw that. So I feel for them. I feel for the teachers. I feel for the parents. I feel for the kids. A lot of them have finally made the right, what I would believe is a rational call, and that is just pulling the plug and saying, hey, if they're gonna be stuck, if I have to be home so that they can be home and safe or whatever, depending on the age of the kids, I might as well just let them do something here that doesn't take up 7 hours of their day and is something that I am comfortable with. And there's so many, Lenny, there's so many resources out there. I mean, there's an unending supply of free homeschool material on the interwebs. That's why the interwebs is a great tool, so we should use it.
I absolutely. Have you ever seen any of my? I had a rant on.
Did you rant, Lenny? I can't believe it.
I rant.
Can't believe it.
Too much on Facebook, and I try not to. But I had a rant on free education because in the past I've had conversations with people that there's no resources, and I say, well, depending on which county you're in, there's a library for starters that you can go to. Usually, again, depending on the library, there's hundreds of books, plenty of books to at least start from, build a foundation. Loudoun County's, luckily Loudoun County's nice, they have online programs as well. But do you ever find that people sort of, you mentioned that there's plenty of resources. Do you think people often miss out on resources? Do you think they just don't know they exist?
I think libraries are great. I think Kindles, one of the best inventions of modern man is ebooks. I really do, because I think books have value. Now that being said, I'm an aspiring, a very ineffective and very unsuccessful aspiring Luddite. I would rather not have any electronics, but I'm always surrounded by electronics. I've got my Kindle, with me now, and I've got the laptop and the whatever. But there's a lot of material that is available for free on the internet without even going to the library. But there's a lot more that are available if you go to the library. You can do Rosetta Stone, just and that's an expensive software. Just being a member of the library. Mango, I think they may be using Mango now. And that stuff has a cost. That being a member of your library gives you a lot of that kind of thing for free. So there's value there. Also, I just, if you're looking for mentors and experts, like once your kid gets in 5th, 6th, 8th grade, if you're not good enough at math to teach them math, then you find somebody to teach them math. It's not. Most of it is not really academic material. I think it's easy to find good academic material. The issue is that a lot of parents, and the reason why we exist at IndED is that a lot of parents are looking for an extra layer of accountability. That's the main reason that that's the main value of schools, that there's another adult human being who understands, at least in some shape or form, what the kids should be learning and directions they could take, who is, hey, he's not learning anything. We're going to make sure, or whatever, somebody else is who's responsible. And so we try to add a layer of accountability, a layer of, responsibility, if you will. And I think many parents are beginning to see that a lot of the things that we consider education is actually upbringing and vice versa.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
It does. I've never heard it said that way. If I understand correctly, you're essentially saying upbringing and education are synonymous, more or less.
Not synonymous, but they're at least related, right? And it's unclear to me where the line is. In other words, let's put it this way. The line is where your expertise fails. Right?
Okay.
So if I'm a dad and I don't know any Spanish, okay? So I just talked to a fellow this morning who likes Spanish and wants to teach kids Spanish. I'm great. Well, I have that resource now. But who's responsible for connecting that resource? Who's the one that chooses whether that's the right resource for them? The parent. It's still the parent, right? So if there's a great textbook on differential equations, and I'm no good at, I had differential equations, I have a physics degree, but if that's too advanced for me as a parent, and that's what my kid needs to learn, I can research and find the right text, or I can find a tutor. It's still, the path is still chosen by either the kid or me, right? The path is either right, just, good, beautiful, whatever because of either the kid or the parent. So there's two different things. There's the path of education, and then there's the tools of education. And I think we kind of conflate the two. Like we say that we do need teachers. Obviously, teachers are an invaluable resource. But do we need them for being a teacher, or do we need them for expertise? And I would posit that many parents, especially well-educated locally, probably have more expertise in a lot of things that teachers are teaching their kids than the teachers do. But they don't have the time, don't make the time, don't want to do, whatever the reason is. We all have to work and make a living. That we outsource that to the teachers. And maybe we should, at least to somebody, if we can't do it ourselves. But that doesn't mean that it's always the best choice. I mean, how many fathers, listen to their, or mothers hear their, the kids come home and they say, you know what I learned in physics and, in history today? I learned that so-and-so and such. And mom or dad look at each other going, that might not be true, right? And if that's, so, are we sure we want to turn it over to the institutions to educate our kids? I don't know. I'm a fan of institutions in general, but I'm just not sure that it's always the best choice simply because it's there.
Yeah.
So the purpose of the hybrid thing is that we want to, and it's not just about IndED, it's about creating a marketplace where there's a myriad of choices for parents to use to educate their kids, and it's not an all or nothing thing. I mean, it's like they can't go to public school, so either we do it all ourselves or we put them in another institution that costs $30,000 a year that does all those things that Lenny wants them to do, right? Which there are a lot of great schools that do a lot of good things, but they cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
So then you're like, well, okay, so if we're going to do that, we need to have a better job, or or both need to work in order to make money to supply a private school. It's getting a little much.
Yeah.
At that point,
it almost kind of creates at least in my opinion, somewhat of a paradox of sorts. The more you try to, I would say, I guess the more you try to account for, the more difficult it gets, to the point where it all just turns to nothing, in a sense.
Well, I mean, and back to the original point, because I really got off on a weird tangent there. Either education is about family and community, or it's not. Okay, if it is, then I would posit the following, and that is that locking them away from the community and away from their families for 35 hours a week is possibly not the most, I won't say humane, that would be mean, but it's not the most practical or logical approach to a community and family driven enterprise, which I would consider education a family and community and conversation driven enterprise. And to the extent that public schools and even some private schools will basically effectively take away those three things, at least the first two. And if you're not in your community and you're not with your family, then it's hard to be educated as a part of it. And the third is whether the school is educating through conversation, which isn't the only way to educate. There's lots of great, wonderful ways to educate, but it needs to be a part of it if we're going to teach kids to communicate better. Have you ever heard my 4 steps to destroying human civilization?
No.
Well, for your listeners or watchers, I think they all need to know this. Okay, so the first step is to raise an entire generation of kids who do not know how to think effectively. Step 1. Step 2 is to give them access to all the information and data on the planet at the tip of their fingers.
Okay.
Okay, so you have all the information,
Google,
but you don't have any wisdom or critical thinking to process the information. That's step 2. Step 3 is to raise another generation of kids who don't know how to communicate effectively with other people, with a variety of people. And then 4, give them access to a device which lets them communicate with the whole planet in 140 characters less at the tip of their fingers. Check, right? So, and I'm not a Luddite, I love technology, but if we really want to rethink education, we have to think in terms of getting back to, this is why COVID has pernicious elements. Is when you're telling people they can't see each other, they can't talk to each other, can't be near each other. Anybody that thinks that doesn't do damage to the community is in a dream world. It does damage. It does lasting, real, concrete, actual mental health damage to the community. To tell for, we're going on a year now, well, in a month or two, 2 months, a little over 2 months, it'll be a full year where we're told every day on the radio, social distancing, blah, 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 blah. And that's fine for adults who have gone their whole lives and it's just a year and we can reset, right? We can reprogram ourselves. But kids need more than that. And the challenge is they needed it before. And I don't think that we were doing a good job of it, even when we didn't tell them to socially distance and wear masks and have plexiglass and et cetera, et cetera. I think the best approach, regardless of the academic materials or the people you get involved or whatever, is to bring kids back into the communities and back with their families and educate them as a part of those things. And I think we can't help but raise more empathetic, loving, caring, community-driven communicators and leaders if they're a part of the world in which they live. That's my take.
I absolutely agree on all 4 steps and everything you said.
Yes. Well, I mean, I'm not picking on the younger generation. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, and so that was a stab at millennials and Gen Z. And that's not, I don't mean to be rude. My son is Gen Z. My daughter is the next one, whatever that's going to be. I'm gonna call it Generation R. That's what I'm getting that out there, just in case somebody catches on. I could say I coined it.
By R.
Robots. I think by the time my 4-year-old is an adult, a large percentage of our economy will be driven by not like Isaac Asimov walking humanoid robots, but I mean robots are doing news articles now. I mean a lot of financial news and sports news is just taking the data and just splicing it together into an algorithm and creating a news article that we read like it's like somebody wrote it.
Yeah.
And I mean that's something that a human being had to do several years ago, and now they're done by robots.
There's a lot that you just said that, 1, I agree with.
Mm-hmm.
2, I find just extremely interesting. Something about the robots that I just want to put in, because it's the most recent thing you said. I actually personally think the robot thing is going to happen a lot. This is me without a background in any kind of artificial intelligence,
Sure.
kind of saying stuff. I'll just put it that way.
Sure.
But I've had discussions with people, and I know Japan is very advanced right now in their AI, and it's not talked about a lot, oddly enough. But one thing that kind of terrified me in a weird way, they have these robots that essentially know how to mimic emotion, and they're for kids. So the kid will push the robot, and the robot will say, something along the lines of, "Ouch, oh, you hurt me," and it'll make crying sounds, and the kid feels bad because
what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I see that, and I'm like, I appreciate the technological advances we made all this time, X amount of years, but at the same time, I see the detriment that can come.
Well, look, if you haven't seen the documentary about sex and robots in Japan, I would recommend. I can't remember what it's called. It may be Sex and Robots in Japan. I don't know, but it's something. The issue is that people literally, the disaster in Japan right now is people are just not having enough sex.
Yeah.
If you can imagine, and that's actually true to a slightly lesser degree, even in the West. There's not. I mean, can you imagine going back to the 60s, 70s, even 80s, and hearing this, hearing that 30 years hence that people will be worried about their kids not having enough sex. I mean, that's hilarious when you think about it.
Yeah.
But the truth is that we have created a lot of tools which have a lot of wonderful things that they provide for society. They make things easier, et cetera, but they also can keep us away from each other, keep us from from doing the human things that humans need to do. I don't know the solution. I'm not a futurist by any stretch of the imagination. Meaning, I don't have some sort of way of gauging. There was an article that came out listened to a podcast on it. It's how I learn everything now. It was about the most important year in the late 20th century, and it was a year that nobody expected, and it was 1971. Right? 1971 being the most critical year. We went to China. MCI was started, which basically started to break up telecom. Disney World was created, and that has had a massive effect on entertainment and media for the last, since then, 40 years now, 50 years. So what else? There were others. Bretton Woods was abandoned, so the gold standard was finally abandoned, and so the Fed had more power than it ever had before. And you just go on and on. All these things happened. And so we don't know. Those things at the time didn't seem that important, and they do seem important now. So I think that I'm probably wrong. Whatever I think, is going to be important 15 years from now for my daughter, it's not going to be anything that we think. It's going to be something that we never expected. So, but robots, right now, it looks like that's going to be a thing, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's very scary to think about, especially when I see things like, I don't look that deep into it, but the deep fake, I think, is that with the
deep fake videos, making, they can put my face on somebody, doing something untoward and make it news.
And and I've seen videos of people calling, and it's AI, and the voice sounds like a human.
Sure,
I would not know, because I can't see the person, I would not know that it's not a person I'm talking to. But yeah, some of those things definitely terrify me a little bit in a weird science fiction way.
Yeah, I've read enough science fiction, so I got into it with some libertarian friends of mine a few years ago about driverless cars, and they're like, "Oh, driverless cars are obviously that's the way to go." We can decrease auto fatalities, and everything will be more efficient and fast, and blah 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 blah. And I'm like, have you never seen a science fiction movie like that? How do you get to be in your 30s or however old they are and not have seen any science fiction movies? So putting robots in control of all of transportation is what we're basically saying. I can't be. Maybe it's a good idea, but I'm gonna need some convincing. I'm gonna need some. Are we preparing kids for that? It's a fair question to ask. Are we preparing kids for a world run by robots? So I don't know. I do think that there's two ways to look at that. If we're looking at it that they all need to learn coding, then let's make sure everybody learns coding. I'm a fan of learning coding. There's a lot of logic that can be learned from it. There's some skills that can be learned from it that'll get you paid, et cetera, et cetera. But maybe in addition to that, what we also need to do is make sure that we're teaching our kids, or giving our kids opportunities to be human beings, and to act as and to interact as humans, so that non-human things or things that don't embrace and nurture and help improve their humanity don't overwhelm the things that do. And so that's why it bothers me that that the response to and legitimate concerns about spreading the virus turned into 7 hours a day on the internet, video calls, and that just had to be a better approach than that. Yeah. I can think of one particular one, right? But I'm biased, but there are better approaches. There's an infinite number of solutions. However many kids there are in the United States, 100 million or whatever, that's how many potential. It doesn't mean that everybody needs to do their own thing. It just means that there are that many potential solutions, to the problem.
Yeah, I agree. And I sort of want to kind of tie that back to the whole great conversations and ask you actually a little bit more about that.
Okay.
But I do have a idea that's a more optimistic view of the future.
Oh, good.
I'm curious to know your thoughts on.
Is it going to fall in line with the Star Trek timeline? Because in order for that to happen, there has to be like World War III.
I'm hoping,
You think we can skip that?
I'm hoping.
See, a lot of people
skip
forget
it.
that about Star Trek. Everything is rosy, but there was a nuclear holocaust in the 90s, right? Luckily, we skipped that. So what's your more positive view of the future? I like this.
My thought was, ideally, if AI does become, I'll say, more prominent in society, something we rely on more.
Mm-hmm.
My hope is that we'll sort of take a more, I try to think of it like an economic approach, where the value of conversations is greater because it's so scarce.
Mm-hmm.
If that, I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense.
So we kind of rebound instead of us.
If conversations become more valuable, then I just want to be in the conversation business.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's sort of my optimistic viewpoint of the future.
I think we're at a. I'm not. Why don't I say this? We're not at a crossroads. We're not like at some seminal point in human history where we have to make a big choice, and we make the wrong choice, we're all going to die. If we make the right choice, then we win. I don't think it's that simple, but I do think. I do think you're right. I think conversation, like human to human, real conversation, is becoming already more valuable. I mean, look at what's happening with social media right now, like today, like within the last week. All the social media companies starting to ban people. I had at least, and we could parse all day about whether it's justified or proper or hypocritical or any of those things. That's not the issue. The issue is, once you realize is that the areas where we're communicating and connecting, I use air quotes with my fingers, connecting with people, really aren't under our control.
Yes.
And that we're really the product. I mean, most people, if they listen to my podcast, they've already seen Social Dilemma, the documentary on Netflix, which did a brilliant job of explaining that, we're the product, et cetera, et cetera. I think that a lot of people are waking up to the idea that doing this thing sort of remotely, sometimes anonymously, and through text is not a long-term effective way to communicate about complex ideas with other people, and so they're pushing away from it. And what the reason why Great Conversations exists is because it's not that I'm a trendsetter or I saw the future or anything like that, but one could argue that things have gone roughly the way I would have predicted with social media, and that is they're sick of being put into a corner and called names and et cetera, et cetera. And I think a better approach is to have personal, real, functional, God forbid, in person, or even over Zoom calls or whatever, with the camera going, mind you, with the camera.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the second best thing. I mean, if you can't get together in person, then you can at least see each other on the camera and talk, and there are things, it doesn't have the same sort of biochemical sort of, there are things you lose from the delay and other things, but it's better than text, better than Twitter mobs or whatever. And so the way Great Conversations kind of started was we had a class at IndED for the kids, for middle schoolers, and it was part of the civics and community. And it was after school at the time. I was trying to get public school kids and private school kids to participate as well. And we did a like a 1 hour thing on sort of civics related or community related, and it was how to talk to people you disagree with. It was for kids,
It's a great skill nowadays.
Yeah, and so I was announcing, it was just it was something that came up And usually when I do things like that, it's because there's somebody that I want to invite, and I'm like, what would they talk about? And it was a local, at the time, he was a town council member. He's a 2-star Air Force general. And so he was kind of volunteering in a sense to fill a seat until the election. And so what could he talk about? I got an idea, because he's led men in battle, et cetera, et cetera. And let's see what he says about that. And so it was a great little conversation. But as I was promoting it, everybody, this was right after 2016. It was right after the election in 2016. It was early 2017. So at the beginning of the Trump administration, there was all these, protests, and et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, January 2017 wasn't a calm time. So we had all that going on, and so every time I was talking about it, people would say, "Can I come? Can I bring my friends?" Right? I don't talk to people you disagree with. It just seemed like a cool thing. And then at the time, I already had a dinner club that I had created, and so we started dinner. I rolled the dinner club into it and started inviting different people to it and trying to make it as robust as possible. And then we started this thing called Coffee Clash, which is every Monday at 11 a.m. at a local coffee shop, the Trading House in Leesburg. We get together, so usually 3 to 5 people, and we talk about religion and politics and philosophy and all those things you're not supposed to talk about in a polite company. And the idea is that whatever your beliefs are, you're in a safe space, and you can share, and you can talk, you can ask questions, you can not be afraid that we're going to judge you, as a bad person, or dox you, or whatever the thing is, because you have different opinions. And so that's been really fun. We've done chess, we've done and one of the things that COVID brought us, which I was very grateful for, is great ideas discussion groups. So we do these things it's called Great Ideas Through the Arts. And so we're going through the great books as a program that's been around for 50 years, a reading program for the great books of Western civilization. And so I got a hold of that. And so what we do is we add a movie assignment to each reading. And so every other Sunday we get together and talk about the movie and the reading assignment. And I try to connect, make the movie about something that's connected, at least in some way, to the reading. We read Plato's Apology, and the movie we watched was High Noon, right? Gary Cooper and Grace Kelly back in the 50s. It's a great flick. Grace Kelly was really young. Gary Cooper played a sheriff who's waiting for a bad guy to come back to town. He's trying to retire. He just married his bride, Grace Kelly. He's trying to get out of town, but he finds out the bad guy's coming back, and he has to stay. He feels he has to stay and defend the town, but nobody will help him. And so just like Socrates, he's looking at the next day, realizing that he's probably not going to make it, right? And so it's a great movie, but it's also a great idea of, what are you willing to sacrifice for the safety of your community? Socrates felt like he was defending something real by sacrificing himself, the ability to think for yourself. This was more, High Noon was a little more direct, but was still a thing. But anyway, so we had we did Psycho for Oedipus, the movie Psycho for Oedipus Rex.
Which one is
Psycho, 1960. It's the first psycho thriller. It's called Psycho. It's Alfred Hitchcock.
That's the black and white.
Yeah, Alfred Hitchcock.
She's in the shower.
Oh, yeah,
okay.
Shower scene.
Okay.
Everybody remembers the shower scene.
In my head, I think of Psycho, then I think of American Psycho, and I
confuse
the two.
I have not figured out how to incorporate American Psycho into the great books. I promise I'll figure out a way. Like when we get to Plato's Cave, we'll watch The Matrix again. That's a good connection. So that we try to, but that came because of COVID. Most of the participants are not local. It's all over Zoom. Mm-hmm. We have a couple people in California. We have one in Florida and Hawaii, one in Arizona, one in Louisiana. So they're kind of spread out over the country, and I don't think I ever would have done it if it hadn't been for COVID. Mm-hmm. I just kind of created that. I had this tool, I had to pay for it, and I'm like, well, why don't I just make it national instead of writing, since we can't get together in person. So it started really early on in COVID. We started the reading group, and it's really fun. But the idea is that conversations can improve a community, and if you the more you have and the more you treat people you're talking to as humans, and I'm going to steal from Heather Heying here, but treat them as humans first, as individuals second. And then if you want to talk about, what group they're in, you can, but humans first and individuals second. And so it's been a blessing for us. It's not something that I really expected to be doing, but it's turned into IndED for adults, basically. And so I'm just finally, with a Great Conversations Network, which we created just a couple months ago, we figured out a way to sort of start tying it all together. So it's really fun.
That is fantastic.
Yeah,
I think.
And you're on that, because we have a podcasters group. Me, you, and Moki, and Jessica, and my friend. I don't know if our friend Jeremy has done anything, but we have a few podcasters on there try to cross promote like we're doing and all that. So it's really fun.
I'm actually gonna probably reach out to a few to try to see if they want to join.
Dude, you should talk to Moki. Moki's a ton of fun. I had him. Did you hear the one that I did with him recently?
I don't think so.
Yeah. So we did a 2-parter on masculinity.
I'm gonna listen to that.
It's really fun because his podcast is a little millennial and progressive and all that kind of stuff, and so I had to kind of toss some ideas at him. So for the second one, I pulled a movie assignment and I made him watch Die Hard.
Don't judge me.
You've never seen Die Hard?
I know of Die Hard.
If you want to talk about masculinity with me, you're gonna have to watch Die Hard. It's the best idea I've probably ever had in my adult life, because it didn't occur to me how many archetypal, stereotypical male characters there are in that movie, and there's a bunch of them. So there's a lot to talk about.
See, that could be a rabbit hole right there.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think of a question I want to ask about that.
Yeah. Let's do that another time, though. It's a lot of fun. I say that a lot, by the way. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
One thing I thought about, sort of when you were kind of going over the different movies, different books.
Sure.
And you mentioned you have the sort of the class about disagreements. I don't know if it's not specifically, I guess, what you said, but that's disagreement. One thing I'm curious to know your thoughts of, do you feel as though a lot of people, and I don't want this to sound too controversial, but I feel like
I like controversial.
It's do you think a lot of people these days don't really, I shouldn't say these days, maybe that's always been how, just by human nature, how we are, they don't really lean into listening, at the very least, to other people who have different opinions? I ask this because one of my main philosophies is, if someone has an opinion that's different from yours, the best thing you can do is try to understand it from their perspective completely, as best as you can, at least, without getting too emotional about it. So I sort of asked, is that something that you see often? Do you think a lot of people don't?
I think that's
a good question.
It's a good question. I like the question. There's a lot of moving parts there. One, of course, is the obvious one, and that is the subject-object question, right? It's something, are we seeking objective truth, or are we just sharing our beliefs and thoughts and perspectives, right? Now, sometimes we can do both, right? And sometimes our perspectives and experiences are fair representations of objective truth, or fair expositories, ways to explore, ways to understand objective truth. I think both are important. I think personal perspectives and experiences are important, and I think to the extent we can try to understand and find objective truth, I think that's important too. I prefer not to rank them, but simply to acknowledge them. So, for instance, if you tell me that your experience as a black male in the United States is X, Y, or Z, I'm going to agree that it probably is. And I'm not going to tell you that it's not, because I'm not a black male in the United States. I'm just a male in the United States. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm not going to argue with that point, which means the conversation might possibly be over. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So when we start talking about experiences, I think it's fine, except for if the other person doesn't have those experiences, what do they have to add to it?
Yeah, there's too much subjectivity involved,
Right.
really.
And it doesn't mean it's not relevant. It just means that often, not always, but often, you have two different sides talking, and one of them, and Moki and I do this, and he'll admit it to it. He's talking of his experiences. He's talking of subjective reality based on what he knows and feels and understands as a millennial, black male, immigrant, whatever it is, right? And so all those things. And I'm picking on Moki today, but the point is that a lot of people talk in those terms, and I think it's great to talk in those terms. I'm fascinated by those conversations. I like to learn from people. I think also sometimes we have a tendency where the other person is just trying to find the truth of something. We're looking at data. Like when you have like real economic concerns or technically economic liberal or classical liberal types, we love data and numbers, and we say that's not true because that didn't work, and look at the numbers.
Yeah.
Minimum wage doesn't work. Look at the numbers. What's another one? Low taxes, on the rich actually help because it filters down, blah blah blah. You can look at the numbers and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're trying to look for truth objectively, and then we're bombarded with, well, that's not my experience. Well, okay, then we're done.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if your experience is this, and the objective data says this, that doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you haven't experienced it, which is irrelevant.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think when people talk, as long as both people are both looking at sharing their experiences, then it works out fine. But if one person is trying to share their experiences and the other one is seeking objective truth, very often, and not that one is better than the other, not by a long shot, but I think that is the source of a lot of very problematic conversations about politics and philosophy and religion, for instance. If I were to pick the three topics that I like talking about the most, those are the three topics. And I lean towards trying to find objective truth. Maybe it's because I'm a privileged white dude in the I don't know. Maybe that's why. But the point is that, and I hate to throw out all those cards, but I mean, I'm just saying that happens a lot. I see that happen a lot. Like, well, that's not true. And my experience shows me, okay, I agree. But what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? So I don't know how to solve that problem. I'm not interested in solving it. Right? I think it's a matter of, again, if we treat people like human beings and we treat them like individuals, which means we have to listen to their perspectives, their individual experiences, their ways of understanding the world based on how they see it and view it. If we start with that, to your point, I think we're not only better people, better listeners, better conversationalists, we're also going to have a better time at explaining our points of view as well. Yeah, if that makes any sense.
It does. And I absolutely agree. I completely agree on that.
There's something more to it though. You the first part was the listening. I think you started off with listening.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, sort of this skill involved with the ability to sort of take in someone's experience and filter it. Is this their experience? Are we debating objective truth versus anecdotal?
There's no reason to debate objective truth versus subjective truth, because the person who's more concerned with subjective truth it's like apples and oranges. You're just not gonna. So the only reason I bring all that up is that I think it does make conversations sometimes harder. And so when I'm talking to someone who wants to share their experiences and is not interested in trying to understand something more broadly, or they think that their way to understand something more broadly is through subjective experiences, then I'm going to try to find other subjective experiences to relay, whether my own or whether somebody else's. I'm not as good at that, right? I'm not made that way. I don't look for ways to talk about my story.
You personally, you mean don't? Okay.
Let me give you an example. Like Moki and I did 2.5 hours roughly on masculinity. And I did not mention once that my father passed away when I was 8 years old. okay? Because I didn't think it was relevant to the conversation. Now, the odds of, if our roles were reversed, the odds of Moki getting to that conversation without mentioning that would have been slim. His personality is such that he wants to share the sort of, the feels, the feels about what, about how it's affected him. I think it's relevant to my experience. I just don't care.
Okay, I see.
And not that I don't care about his, I do. Like if someone in my position tells me their father passed away when they was 8 and part of that has informed him of his view of masculinity in the modern age, I'm not going to tell him that's not relevant. You know why I'm not going to tell him that's not relevant? Because my father passed away. But also because it's objectively relevant. Your experience as a man is different if you didn't have a dad for that 8 to 12, right?
Yes, yeah.
Right, and so that's been part of but I don't think, it's not that it doesn't make me better, it makes me a worse conversationalist, I think I probably would have had a more productive conversation if I would have shared that with somebody who's comfortable with sharing those kinds of things. But I literally didn't think about it until after.
Okay, so that's more of a default, you're saying?
Yeah, to me, I think it's a personal default. I had trouble talking about myself, right? I prefer talking about ideas. I prefer talking about other people. I'm a terrible self-promoter. It's one of the reasons I started a podcast. I wanted to get better at talking about it. And I still haven't done it. I'm still talking about other things. I'm still talking about ideas. I think it's more, to me, my preference is to talk about ideas because people are petty and humans are a pain in the ass. I mean, they are, right? I like talking about ideas because you can parse them, you can label them, right? I like labels for ideas. I don't like labels for people, right? And so once you label a person, well, they have to believe this, and they have to believe this, and they must think this guy's good.
Yeah.
That guy's good. They must think. So you're a conservative, so you must believe this, and this.
Yeah.
Well, I don't actually believe. Well, if you don't believe all that, you can't be a conservative.
Yeah.
Right? Or whatever it is. And so that's not. I call myself a conservative all the time because I think I am. But the point is that it's not. I'm still a human being, and so I'm going to have flaws, and it's going to vary, and it's going to be different. It's going to be messy. Whereas ideas can be delineated and defined and categorized, which I think is much more useful. And it makes for, in my opinion, more productive conversations when you can look at things objectively and not make it personal, because you're more likely, in my view, to find something that might be generally true as opposed to something that, somebody thinks or feels.
Yeah.
See what I mean?
I do.
And it doesn't mean I'm right. Like I said, I think it's a flaw because humans operate in a large part through their own experiences. So it would be weird. It's weird of me not to, to think that it would ever be a less effective way of dealing with human beings. But it's habits and it's personality, and everybody has different personalities, right?
Yeah. I actually used to be in a similar boat. See, now I'm thinking about.
You're a millennial, right? Do you categorize yourself as a millennial? Do you find yourself? You're of the age of being a millennial, right?
Yes, I'm of the age of it.
Okay.
Kind of thinking about the label thing. I won't say I won't label myself as a millennial because I'm definitely millennial by the definition, I guess. But some of the traits that people.
Do you have older sisters and brothers and
only child?
Only child?
I'm just
millennial as they come. I mean, that's. I hate to put you in a category. I just literally said it's a bad idea. But yeah, no, that follows. No, I'm just kidding. But my sister is right there on the cusp. She's an exennial. She's 40 now, and so 1980. So or literally, but her more influential siblings were, her older brother, including me, were Gen Xers, and so she kind of claims.
Okay.
She kind of acts Gen X,
Okay.
So, it all depends. Yeah, so no, it is, I get accused of mansplaining sometimes. Has anybody ever accused you of mansplaining?
No.
No?
Not yet.
Well, that's good. That means you're a better conversationalist than I am, which is good. So when I get accused of mansplaining, you know what I started doing? People, especially, younger women or even older women accuse me of mansplaining. I just tell them, look, if I can't be myself here, then I just don't know why we're having this conversation. I'm just being myself. Can't I be myself?
Yeah.
Right? Can't I just express myself? I mean, this is my truth. My truth is being a mansplainer, right? Well, I'm just kidding, but I mean, I do say that because what's the what do you say?
Out of curiosity, what was if you're willing to share, what was, I guess,
All the time. I mean, at least once every other day or so. But again, it's the nature of social media, and it's the nature of social media with someone who has been educated in prose. Okay, so if you're, and it's one of the Gen Xers have trouble, I think, because we still are of that generation where we have to capitalize the beginning of sentences and use punctuation.
You don't like saying LOL.
I'll text and complete sentences with proper punctuation, quotation marks. I mean, all of it. And so, in a social media environment, when you start essays, when you do a 700-word essay as a comment on a Facebook post. Right?
That's how I write on Facebook. That's why no one reads anything.
That's why nobody reads it. I've got 3 novels on Facebook, at least. I probably have, the Great American novel on Facebook. But as far as number of words, but the point is that, not quality, mind you, but number of words. But I think when people see that, they're like, what are you doing? Like, I mean, seriously, this is just, who do you think you are, right? So and plus my tone is not overly conciliatory, right? I usually, if I'm writing 700 words about this, it's probably something I've thought about, right? And so I think I know something, and that's the first mistake, right? To think that you actually know something, and to talk in terms of you're being knowledgeable about it, and is the first step to mansplaining, right? The understanding of mansplaining is that you're being condescending, right? So if I'm being condescending, which a lot of my lectures on Facebook could be interpreted as such, if I happen to be doing it to someone of the fairer sex, then I'm probably mansplaining, whatever that means.
Yeah,
but that's my personality. It's me being myself, my true self. I have to be the genuine me, right? I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah, just whenever I hear anything with man in front of it, this is gonna totally sound controversial, but bluntly, it just sounds so stupid, because usually whenever people are criticizing someone else doing, they usually do it the exact same. I don't know. I've heard people say mansplaining, but then I've also seen
you say women be condescending.
Yeah, it's not possible. So to me, it's so weird. It's like, well, you're criticizing him in a situation for the exact same thing that you do, that we all do as human beings.
Yeah, we watched it. We watched it in the debate between the vice presidential debate, where immediately they had all these tools about all these clutching of pearls and gnashing of teeth and rending of clothes about Mike Pence being a mansplainer. Meanwhile, I don't know. Okay, maybe he was, but I don't see it. Probably because I'm a mansplainer. I'm one of them. And so that's but I'm okay with it as long as we're the masculinity thing is always a fun topic to me, because I think that normally what we call toxic masculinity is just being an asshole. It's not rocket science. I mean, it's not. I mean, I can lay it out on a whiteboard if it's required, but it's not really that complicated. And if you're not an asshole, then you're not toxic. It's really that easy.
Yeah, that's a whole rabbit.
That's a whole other thing.
I mean, I would be interested to talk about. We're probably gonna agree on it, but I just know me and some friends, we discussed that.
Have you've never been accused of being a mansplainer, though? Has that ever happened?
Not yet. I think I think I try to tailor the manner of speech to the person. So some people, if I think they'll call me a mansplainer, I won't.
See, that's not fair. I don't think we should have to do that. We should be ourselves.
I agree. We shouldn't have to. But
no, I think it's more effective to do that, which is why you're probably better at it than I am, and that's fine. That's good.
There's just some people I see, I'm like, if I say this, they're probably
a mile away. You know what's gonna happen. I usually, a couple of times that I've been accused of it, I just tag like 3 or 4 of the most violent women that I know on Facebook, and like that are friends of mine, and they're gonna back me up, and they just come in, and then I just say, hey, look, no more mansplaining anymore. These are women. You have to listen to them. So I did that once or twice. It was a lot of fun. See, again, it's the tagline of the week. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that might be the title of the.
That's what I do for rules of the game. Is I have the guest come up with a rule, and the rule becomes a title, the title of the episode. And so yeah.
Well, one last thing.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
End on, and I kind of want to just go back a little bit.
Sure.
Because this is a topic I have discussions about from time to time with friends and acquaintances on social media.
Acquaintances.
Sort of the idea of,
not to interrupt, there must be a term, right? Because acquaintances are people like you run into, and you at least know them, and they know who you are. Whereas people you run into on Facebook on a regular basis, I don't think it quite qualifies as an acquaintance even. It's I don't know what the word is. We're gonna have to come up with a word for Facebook community or social media universe, something. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so sort of the idea of freedom of speech.
Okay.
Just to me is, I haven't gone super deep. I have some friends who are from like Russia, they're a little bit older, so they.
Old like me.
I don't know, how old are you?
46.
They're close to it. They're close to it.
Yeah.
So they're
Not quite that old.
I didn't mean that.
Not quite as old as you, Butch. I mean, Jesus.
But just from different areas, I've sort of experienced a lack of freedom of speech.
Yeah. Once you've been in a place without freedom of speech, it does change your perspective.
Yes.
And perspectives are important.
Yes. So I just try to explore from different people, because I hear some people, we should have, I don't want to word this poorly, they're sort of anti freedom of speech, at least vocally. Personally, I don't think they thought it through as much as, I don't know if that sounds bad.
It's possible they haven't thought it through, right? Yeah.
And then I have other friends, sort of, as I mentioned, who lived in a situation where freedom of speech, you say something against the government or someone else, and you might not be there tomorrow, or
sure.
I guess to not make this whole question too long, I guess overall, how important would you say is freedom of speech to society? Do you think what's a good way to put this? Do you think we can loosen up on freedom of speech? Do you think we should double down on allowing freedom of speach?
Can I offer another approach to the question?
Mm-hmm, sure.
No one with 2 brain cells rubbed together is going to say, freedom of speech is not that important. Most people who say, well, yes, but, like, freedom of speech is important, but, right? You've heard that before.
Well, so I asked because I try to, one of the recent videos I saw was a Stephen Crowder video, and he's asking people about freedom of speech, and this one person he spoke to was very adamant about less freedom of speech, and he would ask, he kind of counter, say, what about this? What about this place? No, less freedom of speech is always fine. He's like, what if you said something and the government took you away? That's fine. And so
well, that's not a rational point of view.
Yeah.
Like for a person who wants freedom and at least, from even a Hobbesian point of view, an elementary level of freedom and liberty on your person, then freedom of speech is sort of required, at least to a degree. So usually when I hear objections to free speech, it's yes, freedom of speech is important, but right. So in other words, it's a freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is important, but there are checks on it that we should put in place. So there are limits to it. Is that what you're kind of get to, or what are the limits?
Yes, just sort of. I
don't think there's any fair argument to say that the government should have complete and total control over speech, because that's what we're talking about. If somebody is taking that extreme position, if you don't have freedom of speech, that means that somebody is deciding what speech is appropriate, which means the government. There's no other way to interpret that. So if you want to put other human beings in charge of your speech, you should probably go somewhere else, and somewhere where you're okay with a totalitarian regime, because that's what a totalitarian regime does, is they control speech, which means they control thought. And anybody who tells you that controlling speech does not control thought is lying to you, because that's what it is. Okay, so if we're going to try to find where the limits of free speech are, I think that's a fair way to. But I don't think there's any argument to be made for like no freedom of speech, right?
That's usually where I'm thinking. Like, there's no real rational.
But that was your original question was, should we double down on should we make freedom of speech even freer than it is now, or should we not worry about any limitation? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yes.
So I think we've eliminated this extreme of no freedom of speech. So the question is the other extreme super cool and appropriate? Is that one of the things you're asking?
Yes.
Absolute freedom of speech. I mean, other than libel and inciting violence and things like that. Those are things that are legally have been vetted pretty well in our courts. About, and we have the most in the United States. We have the most blatant protections of speech of anywhere in the world. So let's clarify the question. So ask it again in a different way, knowing that we're not going to go to this extreme because that's irrational. So now we're trying to figure out where the limits are on this side, right? Or am I missing something?
No, I guess maybe a better way to put it.
Okay.
Where is the line, I guess, between too much freedom of speech and not enough?
Okay.
That makes more sense.
Okay. Well, let me approach it this way. Do you believe in hate speech? Do you believe there's such a thing as hate speech?
I believe in the idea.
Okay. Do you believe hate speech should be restricted, eliminated, prosecuted, or any of that?
No. Usually, in that, when people usually bring up hate speech, my counter is, unless there's a call to action, I do not think.
Which would be inciting to violence, right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I'm with you. I don't think, and there are hate speech laws out there. There's hate crime laws out there. So, which is a form of hate speech. So, hate speech laws, because, you have to express some reason for committing violence against someone that would say that you're hateful in order for it to qualify as a hate crime. So basically you're adding hate speech to the charge in a sense. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, it doesn't to me. Like, that doesn't, like, if I kill someone or I beat them, it really doesn't matter why I did it. It could be because they stole my girlfriend or the color of their skin. I think the charge should be basically the same.
Okay.
So that's my take. I've been wrong before, but it's fine. And there are arguments for hate crime legislation, I get it. But the question is hate speech itself. Like, should there be laws against being a Nazi? And so to that, I ask you, and this is, if you want to go controversial, this is where you want to go. Should it be against the law to be a racist? Should it be against the law to be a misogynist? Should it be against the law to hate Jews or whatever, right? That's the question. Because if it's not against the law to be a racist, and I don't think it is. I mean, I'm not a fan of racists. I think, I think we should not encourage that kind of thing. But is it against the law to be a racist?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so what we're saying is a certain segment of the population, even though they feel that, as long as they keep their mouths shut, then they're fine. I don't think that works. I just don't think it works in the long term. Because, they're only going to say what they think to people who might be sympathetic to it. And so what happens? Over the course of time, they have these secret little groups, and we've had those in the past. You've heard of them. And they meet in secret, and they talk in secret, and they have symbols and secret handshakes, and et cetera, because what they say can't be said, right? And so in the end, we haven't really convinced anybody to change their point of view of things. Whereas if we said, hey, you know, if you want to say racist things, say racist things. What's the proper response to that? To counter it. The answer to hate speech is more better speech. That's the way I've always thought about it. And if you look at universities because what happens is, let's say we were to draw a line. Like if you're a Nazi or you're a KKK or you're, you know, anti-Semitic or you're, you know, whatever, you hate certain groups of people that you feel like don't belong, right? There are sanctions, there's laws, there's speech codes, okay, these things aren't allowed. I look at this big table. I mean, just these things. Right? You can be a communist. You can be you can hate capitalists. You know, you can hate. I'm not going to pick on my Marxist friends. I'm sure they're kind, wonderful people. But the point is, we decided that this segment of speech is just beyond the pale. So what we have to do is we have to create all these tools, these laws and these sanctions and zoning regulations or whatever you want to call them, to make sure that we keep these guys in check. The challenge is people who get this power want to make this segment they want to make it a little broader. Right? They want to make, well, okay, if you say you oppose affirmative action, then that's kind of racist. And so, you know, that's also if you say that you don't believe in the minimum wage, well, that affects minority populations to a greater degree than it does others, and so that's racist too. And so we keep broadening this spectrum of what is considered acceptable and what is considered not. If you go to a university now, it's pretty much anything on this side of the table. Anything over here is off limits, and you can lose your professorship, or you can lose your ability to be a student, whichever it is. So no, I think just like anything else, we're giving people power to control other people's thoughts. I just don't think it's productive. Whereas if, you know, the Nazis, you know, came out and were able to just express themselves, the other, including everybody over here and everybody over there, would laugh at them and tell them that they're crazy, and then counter that that's stupid and that's crazy. And please, you know, you probably shouldn't say stupid crap like that because it makes you look like an idiot. And I love you as a human being, I care, right? So, but what doesn't work is giving the government or whatever these kinds of tools, and two, dehumanizing them. You know, we want to take somebody who believes something really problematic, like really bad, and we want to make him into a less of a human being. That's been happening in the last few days. Anybody that, it doesn't take any time at all to find some articles that dehumanizes all the people who protested on the Capitol. Yes, right? And so we're going to take a category of people we disagree with, even if there's ample myriads of reasons to disagree with them, we can't dehumanize them. We can't call them less than human. My friend Randy, who was the number 3 guest on my podcast, one of the things he likes to target or focus on, he's a progressive, you know, and so we argue a lot. But he, there's that story of several years ago, or many, I think it was a decade or 2 ago, where this guy, a black guy, decided to go down to wherever he went and befriend a bunch of KKK guys, right? And you know that story.
I don't know his name.
I can't remember his name, but you know, he made friends with these KKK guys for like 20 years and converted 200 or 300 people were no longer KKK guys because this guy decided to be friends with them. He didn't tell them they weren't human. He didn't tell them that they should be ashamed of themselves. He didn't try to, dox them on Facebook. He became friends with them, and he showed that he cared about them. And just through that, they let go of the nonsense that they had been hanging on to. There is so much to learn there. I don't even know. I mean, you could spend the rest of your life making that the way that we should communicate with each other. And that's the way I think we should communicate with each other. When I talk to somebody who, claims to be on my side of the aisle, and they say we want some sort of Christo-fascist paradise where only Christians are allowed and blah, and I'm like, no. I mean, the answer to that is no, right?
Yeah.
And then, but I'm not gonna call him a dummy. I'm not gonna tell him he's not worthy of calling himself what he wants to call himself. I'm not gonna tell him that he's a lesser human because he's wrong. People have a right to be wrong. Even about really extreme and important things, they have a right to be wrong. That's probably a good first step. If you're talking to people you disagree with, first of all, the people you're talking to have a right to be wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's the way I have to think about it because I'm usually right. So I'm just kidding. No, I'm joking. No, I'm just saying that's, if you think you're right, the first thing you have to do with the person you're talking to is assume that they have a right to be wrong. But if I talk to someone way on the other side that is a Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, like your person who doesn't believe in free speech, might be one of those. He might be one of those Maoist types. There are people out there, like walking around, who are, I'm a Maoist. Okay, I mean, I love you. You're a wonderful person. I'm sure you care about your friends and neighbors, and that you think that this is a rational approach. I just disagree. And to pretend that these guys are somehow more dangerous than those guys is also folly. I think it's untrue. I think it's fundamentally, not only do we have the objective, here I go again, the objective numbers to back up that those guys are more dangerous than these guys, but functionally they both are dehumanizing philosophies, right? And so I'm just, that we should throw a lot of, what's the term? You throw in a lot of water, cold water, a lot of flack. Flack, I think is the term, at really bad ideas. The only way to get the flack to them is to get the ideas out there where everybody can see it. You say, that is Nazism and it's bad. We should not do that. I mean, I'm sure he's a wonderful person and he loves his family. He's a caring human being, but he's wrong. And and everybody should see it. We should expose it.
Yeah.
And the same with the Maoists.
Which goes to the conversation piece. You have to actually converse.
You have to converse.
To actually understand that.
If you can't converse with them because they've been told they can't talk about it, then one of two things. Either they can't think it or they can say it. You cannot improve the lives of communities that have dangerous elements, if you will, by pretending they don't exist. And that's what we're saying. Unless we want to somehow, re-educate them, right? Unless we're talking about thought crime, which is what the totalitarian regimes are about. They're about changing the way we think. If you haven't read 1984 or Animal Farm or any of those, then most of us know what those things look like. When you take away speech, you take away free speech, you take away free thought. And to pretend you're doing one and you're doing without the other is I think is a mistake.
I agree on that.
Yeah.
Do you think at all it's, for some people I should say, that do try to eliminate the free speech, free thought by extension, do you think it's intentional, or do you think it's with good intent? But let me go back. I guess, do you think they're actively trying to suppress free speech, for example, for bad reasons, I guess, to simplify it, or do you think they have good intentions, but maybe the actions that they're doing are just, they're not productive? Or
it depends. I think in most cases, I assume that most things that people advocate for or do are based on good intentions. That's another key and useful exercise when it comes to conversations, is assume the other person is not out to kill people or assume the other person does not have murderous intent. When I think it was Jordan Peterson the other day, it was like, how do you tell, where do you draw the line, or how can you tell that something like Marxism is bad? Well, the murders are a good indicator. Like if you had to start somewhere, I'd say the number of murders that are required to make your regime work might be a good indicator. So I think in some cases, people who are seeking power and they're trying to they're trying to consolidate power along, to themselves, then murders are required.
Mm-hmm.
And so those ideas that they're spouting have consequences, and to the extent that we can try to check those powers, we should. But I think in most cases, when we're talking about conversations with our brethren in the community, then we're not talking about people who are seeking power, we're just talking about people who think there's a better way to do things. And in that case, we have to assume good intent. If we're assuming good intent, then yeah, somebody who wants to stifle free speech, or somebody who thinks there are limits on free speech, and that, for instance, just to pick on the poor Nazi, there's this guy here, I'm just picking on him all day. Well, let's just take this Nazi. There's a fair argument to be said of the whole community that guy should not be allowed to talk, right? Mm-hmm. The problem is, like I said, we may have good intentions. We may feel like his ability to speak is going to do damage to the community. I understand that argument and I appreciate it. But the problem is, in the process, we're dehumanizing someone. We're saying that he's not a human being anymore. We're saying he's not one of us. He's an other. He's not worthy because his ideas are bad. Now, his ideas, just to be clear, are bad, mm-hmm. right? But it doesn't, I have bad ideas about, what movie to watch. Look, I don't know how Nazis rank with whoever made Wonder Woman 84, but I would put whoever was in that pitch meeting that said this is a good idea, I'd put them over here. I don't think they should be allowed to make movies. Now, I would not stifle their free speech, but I would say they should not be allowed to make movies anymore, at all. Have you seen it, by the way?
I've heard bad things about it.
I like to pick on it. But the point is that, I think it was a bad idea. And I think it was based on bad ideas to make that movie, but that doesn't mean that they're not, to be honest, it doesn't mean they're not allowed to make movies anymore. They're allowed to make movies anymore, even though it was a serious bad idea. I'm not trying to make Nazism into something that is petty, like a movie. I'm just saying that just because something is a really, really bad idea, or somebody has really flawed and plus it's hypocritical. The reason why it's a bad idea is because it dehumanizes other people. So the last thing we should do is to dehumanize them and say that they don't count because they have a certain belief. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. So I don't know. I think most people, though, who want to restrict that person's speech have good intentions. They're trying to save their children from having to hear stuff like that. Not me. I want my child to hear things like that. I want my child to know what really bad thinking looks like. And that's back to the original conversation, it's a part of our job as raising kids. It's not simply exposing kids to as many ideas as humanly possible. It's helping us, helping our families, helping our kids, helping our communities seek good in the world. If we're not seeking good and virtue and wisdom and character in our children and in our communities, then it doesn't matter, what stupid ideas come out, because, there's no anchor. There's no place the reason why if my child were to hear something Nazi-esque, it wouldn't make any sense to him because I've raised him otherwise.
Right.
And if you're concerned that your college student can just hear Nazi speech and all of a sudden, it makes sense, we should just get rid of all the black people. Seriously, if that's easy, if it's that easy to convert someone, then there's something that might have been missing from their, right? There's something.
The foundation of thought it's lacking.
Yes, and I think that in some cases that could be true. It could be true that a lot of kids are not prepared to handle extreme thought, and the reason I know that is because a lot of kids go to college and become Marxist. Yeah, and that's not healthy for society. Right? I don't know. I hate to pick on Marxists. I'm sure they're all wonderful people who care about their family and their community. But I don't see how you can look at it. It's been tried all over the world, on every continent, in small countries, little countries, Confucianist societies, Western societies, Catholic societies, Protestant societies, rich, poor, in the middle, north hemisphere, southern hemisphere, industrialized, non-industrialized, all over. Communism has been tried. Socialism has been tried.
But the next person that tries it will.
But they got it. Now we got it. But now we have the formula because we have all this experience. We have all this data, and from my point of view, we have all this data, and it tells us that it won't work. And there's a lot of reasons why it doesn't work. But one of my favorite reasons is that it doesn't accommodate a variety of personalities. Maoism, Marxism, whatever you want to, communism, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't accommodate sociopaths well, right? So
I never thought about that actually.
I mean, Brett Weinstein likes to talk about, 5% of the population might be sociopath. We can't kill them all. Right? We have to deal with them. So, a capitalist society actually accommodates a variety of personality types. Right? So if you're a worker bee, then you work well in a capitalist society. If you're a go-get-em entrepreneur, you work well in a capitalist society. With the social society, all the personality types have to kind of be sort of the same. Yeah. And so it doesn't, diversity is not encouraged in this. So I think that's one reason. That's my favorite reason. There's a lot of other real cool ones. But, this doesn't work either, right? Because it's a dehumanizing philosophy. I think Maoism and Marxism is also dehumanizing. I think that's the reason they don't work. Even though they're a different kind of dehumanizing religion, they both counter what we have a fairly good experience and idea of what works in terms of human flourishing in a society. Both of them seek to either ignore it or change it or manipulate it or stamp it out. And that usually is not a good idea.
Yeah.
It doesn't really work. So free speech, no, I'm pro. Just count me down as pro. I'm sorry, we could have just done this as a bumper sticker,
No.
Pro free speech.
Just a super quick question.
Okay.
Very random. I don't know if you've heard of this. Can't remember his name. Jack Dorsey, the Twitter.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I heard he's trying to do I didn't look too deep. I heard about this a few days ago, so I didn't look that deeply into it. Apparently he's trying to start a program himself where, I'm trying to remember the exact details of it. I think he's trying to essentially go the route of giving people universal basic income. I don't know exactly how the execution is going to go down, and I don't know I haven't seen anything writing about his plan or when he's planning on doing it. Half of me likes the idea that he is willing to put his own money where his mouth is, so to speak, and see if it works, to try it out as an experiment. The other half of me kind of just thinks it won't work. I don't know. He's a billionaire. He's probably a lot smarter than I am. So
UBI is it's like driverless cars. It's one of my favorite ways to pick on libertarians. A lot of libertarians love universal basic income. They think that we can dismantle the welfare state by doing, it'll be more efficient. Just give them the money, that way you're taking them out of all the bureaucracy and whatever. I don't know if you watch any sci-fi, but it's a TV show on Amazon called The Expanse. It's like 200 years in the future, and half of the people on planet Earth, this is one government, the UN, basically runs the world, and half of the people on planet Earth are on UBI.
That sounds like a disaster.
I don't know, is it? I think so, but that's just I don't know. Maybe that's the way it should be. The other thing too, I mentioned Star Trek earlier, right? The reason why I love talking about Star Trek is that when you look at, I don't know, do you do any Star Trek? You ever done any Star Trek?
I've seen a few episodes. I had some other roommates that were really into it.
Well, the thing about the Star Trek is that in the future you can make anything, including your food, with a replicator. This little box about this. Call it a 3D printer. Right? We have a 3D printer. I've got one at home, 3D printer about this big. I don't have a replicator. That would be really awesome. All right, so all your nutritional needs, everything you need is in this box. All you need is power. Okay, and obviously they've solved the power problem. Matter, antimatter, cold fusion, or whatever they've done. Energy is practically free. Okay, so if energy is free and everything you need can be, for your sustenance, it can be made in this box, what do you need to pay for? Now, lucky for you as a real estate agent, you still need a place to put your box, right? I still need a place to put your stuff and to put my thing and plug it in. But if energy is free and everything I need to survive is in this box, you don't need to really pay for anything. So so if nobody needs to work in order to survive, other than just to pay for their little hovel, then the economy suffers, right? There's the free market kind of freewheeling economy that we have right now would be different in that circumstance. So I think when people are looking in the future, if we assume that we solve the energy problem we have, we're also getting more and more efficient about how we create food. And so if all those things, I don't know if it'll be that extreme. I don't know if we'll be able to press a button and get chicken a la king on a plate or whatever like they do on Star Trek. But I think that's something to consider. The more things that can be provided for free by the government or the collective community, the less we really need to worry, I guess, about whether people are working for a living or not, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if that's the case, less people will work. And if less people work,
less gets done.
Less progress. From a capitalist point of view, and I'm an unabashed capitalist, then I think society might have a tendency to decay at that point.
That's sort of usually the conclusion I kind of make.
Well, that's where a lot of science fiction goes. There's two ways it goes. Either it's paradise, like Star Trek, or it's the other way. Most science fiction goes the other way.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but most science fiction doesn't take that premise that Star Trek does. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer whether again, I'm not a futurist. I don't know whether UBI is inevitable, because inevitably nobody really needs to work, and so we might as well just, if they're not going to do it anyway, then we might as well just give everybody kind of basic. Well, they could buy clothes, and they could buy movies, entertainment. They can watch the Gladiators or whatever it is.
Just luxury type.
I guess that's all. Speaking of sci-fi, one of George Lucas's first movie was THS 1138. It's what's his name? He lives down on the plains. Robert Duvall is the main character, and the future is like a hyper-capitalist future where everything is kind of being provided, like I said, but the citizens are programmed to go buy things just because it's like the religion, and so they go buy like a round ball, and then they go home and they put it in a recycler because they're just programmed to buy things. And it's sort of this it's a denouncement of capitalism and the culture in which everything is based on. There's even like a robot priest or whatever they go to confess to, and the priest says, buy more things, it'll make you feel better or whatever. And so there's a lot of ways in which we have posited over the last 150 years that capitalism would eventually run itself out. That's the whole precept of Marxism, is that capitalism has been great. Marx says capitalism has been great, but we've hit our limit. And since Marx, we haven't hit our limit. Even in the last 30 years, the amount of people who've been brought out of poverty, on the planet has been, monstrous. We've gone through like 46% of the world in abject poverty to 6% in a matter of a few decades. Mostly, not completely, but mostly because of capitalism. So if that's the case, I don't think it's run its course. But at some point, if we start to solve some of these energy and nutrition problems, if that's solved, that people can just plug in for free and get everything they need to survive, then is that going to mean the end of capitalism? And if that's the case, who cares about UBI at that point? It doesn't even really factor in the sense. It's like everybody, there's no wealth distribution required at that point to speak of, and so it's not that big of a deal, if that makes any sense.
It does.
So I'm just not, I don't know. But falling short of solving all of those problems. I think UBI is probably just as bad as the idea of, minimum wage. I'm not a fan of the minimum wage. I think minimum wage is a bad idea. Raising the minimum wage is an even worse idea.
Mm-hmm.
So I lean against presuming that we can duplicate the benefits of a welfare state more efficiently than we are now by pretending it's no longer a welfare state. I'm just not sure that's really objectively true. So it's a hard call for me as someone who's kind of a limited government type to say that, because I hear the argument from other limited government types that it'd just be more efficient just to do UBI. It's like, $1,000 a month or $1,200 a month or whatever it is. It's like it's the poverty level. I don't think that's really what we need to be focusing on, but I've been wrong before, right? So.
Yeah, I think when I first heard about universal basic income was, I think it's Andrew Yang. I think that was part of his platform.
It was a big chunk of his fight. His goal was to make UBI more supported within the Democrat Party, and it worked. I mean, if you do the polling before Andrew Yang and after Andrew Yang, public support UBI on the Democrat side has gone way up. He did a really good job of that.
Yeah, when I first heard it, I actually heard it and I immediately thought, oh, it's a great idea. If you give people money, they'll have more to pay for rent.
Well, that's maybe. I mean, but the thing is, humans are kind of lazy. Like we're gonna do as little as we can get away with, and that's always been true. The only reason why someone could rationally get behind it without, and considering that would be that, hey, we're doing it anyway. We might as well not waste all the bureaucracy and give them a choice. Instead of buying them food, buying them healthcare, buying them housing, we're just going to give them money and we're going to take away all that stuff. That's not how it's going to work.
Yeah.
Just so you know, that's not how it's going to work. They're not going to take away it all. It's going to be in addition to. Or if they do it and they get rid of it, these things will find their way back. Well, yeah, they're getting their UBI, but I think we can be more efficient in how we choose housing for them. Right? Or we can make sure they get more nutritious food. So we're going to provide more nutritious food. I mean, I know I've seen that movie before. It's not, no. So I don't think it'll replace anything. And if it doesn't replace anything and make it more efficient, then why are we doing it again? I'm still confused. I do think that the path there is not to give the federal government more power. I think the path there is for us to figure out how better to support the people in our communities and local governments, local communities, local nonprofits, local churches, local humans should find more creative, even competitive, but compassionate ways to provide for those in need. And I think if we try to solve the problem that way instead of creating yet another tool for the federal government to, it would be the last vestige of distance that citizens have between the federal government. And I'm a federalist at heart. I believe that states should be more assertive in how they decide that their communities should be run, and I just don't think UBI is the way to go there. But I understand the sentiment. I just don't know that that's. I don't think it solves the problem because it's another way of taking away our ability as individuals to help. Like if we're going to be charitable and compassionate, then we have to be more involved in ourselves, not necessarily outsourcing it.
Yeah, I think we're more or less on the same page.
Yeah.
With that's sort of how I concluded when I thought about it. I think initially it was more emotional. I was like, oh, I want these people to have extra so they can not struggle.
Sure.
And then as I thought about it, I sort of factored in, well, in reality, what's likely going to happen if we just give money to people? What has happened in the past if we've just given things away to people?
We have plenty of examples. Yeah, there's plenty of examples of that. If you added, what's it called? Child tax credit, I think it's called, is that right? Something child tax credit. that, there have been studies that show that hasn't made people less poor, right? The extra tax credits for those who are the lower income, it hasn't helped their plight, if you will. There's a lot of good data on it.
Is that, I'm not that familiar, is that sort of just what it sounds like, that you just get a?
Yeah, it's a child tax credit. It's been around for a long time, and a lot of Republican and Democrat politicians will say, hey, let's increase the child tax credit because it makes it, it's good for poor people. And that's true, but there's very little evidence that it somehow has helped them, rise out of poverty. Right? It doesn't really do that. And so there's evidence that giving doesn't, like cash basically, doesn't actually result in more responsibility and an increased mobility to higher quintiles, right? Quintiles of income or wealth. So anyway, but see, I think you're right. I think that it sounds great on the surface. I just have lots of questions. Yeah. I've also been skeptical of things like the fair tax. Have you ever heard of the fair tax?
No.
It's all the rage for a while, especially in right circles. But there's a lot of premises built in. It's a consumption tax. So instead of income tax, you have a national sales tax. But again, I'm like, okay, what's the number? And I just think that the first step is if we're going to help people, then people should help people, because charity works in a binary, in a bi-directional way. Like charity works because not only does the person receiving benefit, but the person giving benefits. And so if we're focusing more on going, on returning to a place where human beings do most of the giving, and as opposed to governments, then I think that people giving benefit as well. They feel more a part of it. They get something from giving, givers gain, if you will. And because the alternative is, instead of me giving directly, I'm going to vote for people who are going to pass laws to take more money from other people so that these other people can give to them. There's like from my action to when this person gets their benefits, there's like 6 people and no love or charity involved.
Yeah.
Right? It's just bureaucracy. And so I've deprived myself. Not only do all these people have to, through politician fundraising, to legislative costs, to the contracts and the employees to administer. I mean, not only do I waste a lot of money getting it from here to there, but I also don't get the benefit of being charitable. So, and look, I say this a lot, I don't do enough. I'm sure none of us do enough to help our neighbors in need. But I think the more we do that, the better off we are, as opposed to creating, this will fix it.
Yeah.
That silver bullet thing. We just do this, we can get rid of all this other stuff. It'll be way more efficient, and everybody will be happy. It's this utopian silver bullet approach to policy. As soon as you tell me that something is going to work or solve a problem, I'm magically going to be skeptical. Yeah, exactly. So I enjoyed it, man. It's been a lot of fun.
It was a great time.
All of it has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I learned a lot from this.
Well, thanks, man. No, me too. I like it. I like the way you ask questions. I like the way that you approach topics. I think as many people as possible should approach topics in a similar way, and conversations in a similar way. So I'm always happy to chat.
Yeah, I would love to have you on for a second episode in the future. I'm so down. We can start that one off with masculinity, because I'm
masculinity
with the masculinity discussion. So, where can, I guess, anyone who's looking for IndED or great conversations?
Yeah, the easiest way is IndED.us, IndED.us, and we have a new network that's should be accessible on that site. The network is called the Great Conversations Network. We have a blog for Great Conversations as well, and I have my own podcast, Rules of the Game podcast. So if you can follow me on Twitter at RealButchPorter, and IndED.us and GreatConversations.us should have everything else.
Okay. And I'll link all of that in the notes, in the comments,
Sure,
or
sure.
it'll be on YouTube and anywhere else. They'll find it.
Excellent.
But I appreciate you taking the time to interview with me, Butch.
Well, I don't want to discriminate against anyone who's feverishly writing this down with pen and paper. It's possible. I'm just saying it's possible.
There were ants either.
So no, thanks for having me, man. It's been really cool.
All right, I appreciate it. Well, looking forward to seeing you guys in the next episode. Take care, guys.